how we overcome this has a lot to do with the public reaction to it. And that's why I also say it shouldn't only be about the consumers to defend their consumption, because that alone will not be enough.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hello and welcome to Vaping Unplugged, a podcast from the World Vapers Alliance, where we talk harm reduction, vaping, and politics surrounding those issues. And for the later, we have today a very special guest who is currently working on a very interesting project about the history of prohibition and how prohibition looks today. Welcome to Bill Wirtz, who is Senior Policy Analyst at our partner organization, the Consumer Choice Center. Hey, Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael, and hello to all the vaping people out there.
Bill, before we go into your latest project, maybe you can give us a quick overview, who you are, what do you do, how are you connected to the vaping world, why is it of interest to you?
So my name is Bill Wirtz. I'm originally from a small country that you cannot find on most of the maps. It's called Luxembourg. Some of the Europeans will know, the international folks might not. And my background is in broadcast journalism. I used to do radio and investigative journalism in magazines, and have always written about issues that pertain to individualism, whether people get to make their own choices, what is the responsibility of government, what is a good public health measure. Also, as a background, I started smoking when I was, I believe, 15 years old, and I got to a point when I started studying that I was smoking about a pack a day. And it's only later. I mean, I did reduce my tobacco consumption quite a bit just by myself, but it was, for me also personally, through vaping that I got this down. I'm still a dual user today. After a meal, I will smoke a cigarette, but compared to what it used to be because of vaping, I'm also have quite reduced my consumption of tobacco. And I've been with Consumer Choice Center for the last 6, almost 7 years-ish. I usually actually cover agriculture. And what is so interesting with the topic of agriculture is that we have the same conversation on sort of evidence-based policymaking. So this is the bottom line of what I do is what is the evidence on this topic? And then you usually have like your activists that, pretend that, something needs to be banned completely because of adverse effects that often they either magnify in its importance or just completely make up. And so this issue is important to me. Harm reduction is important to me because it's one of those topics of distortion of science. And so that's why I got working on it.
Very cool. So basically, radio investigative journalism plus nicotine consumer ties all into your newest project called the Fun Police. So what is the Fun Police about?
Yeah, so Fun Police is it's a whole campaign that we have at Consumer Choice Center. It has a couple of things. I mean, we have we write some op-eds on the issue, and we have a documentary which will be streaming at the end of December. But what I'm currently working on the most is the podcast series. So this is where we have a 5-part original podcast series, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the major podcast platforms, where we look into the history, the development of prohibitionism, sort of what are the motivating factors for people to want to ban vaping, smoking, alcohol, gambling, all those things that we sort of describe as vices or sins, with different words to describe it. And we had episode 1 and 2 already released, and as we are speaking, episode 3 is about to be released. And I really wanted to take the documentary storytelling mode for this series, sort of what people might be used for from This American Life or NPR type podcast. And the motivation for me also was that I wanted to create something that is accessible to people who don't necessarily know much about this already, and people who just stumble upon a podcast, who listens to this. I was telling another show not too long ago. There's plenty of documentaries and news reports that are very negative on vaping and a lot of the other issues that we talk about in the series. And I wanted something to be out there that is complete and also talks about harm reduction in a positive sense, while also giving you all the facts. I mean, activism is one thing, but we also need a lot of education out there for people. So this is what I wanted to do with this series.
Did you vape today? Or drink? Did you have a beer, a glass of wine, place a bet, or eat chocolate? There are activists out there who believe that you are hurting yourself, and that for the sake of the greater good, you should be banned from doing it. These activists are neo-prohibitionists. They don't believe in your right to choose, and they have big budgets to lobby governments to restrict your lifestyle. And their actions have real consequences.
Prohibition of something, whether it's riding without a seatbelt, whether it's selling cigarettes, this creates new opportunities for citizens to interact with the police.
Garner, who had been accused of selling cigarettes illegally on New York's Staten Island, seen here being taken down by NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo.
So this Orwellian-sounding FCTC is about benefiting the black market and making poor people pay.
I listen to people saying, oh, we don't want to tax the poor. Well, we want the poor to live longer so that they can get an education and enjoy life.
This group took public money to create a pseudoscientific amalgamation of studies with low scientific validity to lecture you about having more than 2 beers a week. I think anybody here can see through the nonsense.
Fun Police, a 5-part Consumer Choice Center original podcast, uncovering the prohibitionist movements seeking to ban it all. New episodes dropping weekly wherever you get your podcasts.
And so for the listeners, what can they expect? What are the other topics? You already gave a little bit away. We will talk a bit more about vaping, but what are the other issues where the Fun Police is out and hunting for enemies?
I mean, in episode 1, which is called The Premise, we look also at the history of prohibition, and of course the most notable example of prohibition that people can think of and always think of is alcohol prohibition. And this is especially in the United States because it was not just the largest country today and at the time that had this significant of alcohol prohibition, but also that was very fond of trying to enforce it, right? And you have certain products that are out there that are illegal, but the government isn't doing too much to enforce it. But prohibition in the US was genuinely enforced. So we wanted to look at sort of what led to that prohibition, and also just talk about the motivations of people. Because back then, when people wanted to ban a vice, it was because of reasons of public morality. And we sort of moved away from that now. So today, there's no temperance movement that says vaping should be outlawed because God is telling us not to vape. I don't think God has opinions on vaping. Maybe some people think he or she does, but I think this argument wouldn't really stick with people today. So essentially, what we have now is a public health lobby, and the public health lobby describes it in scientific terms. It says, well, smoking isn't good for you, and neither is vaping, and those two are the same thing. And the thing with scientific arguments is that people can verify them. Today, compared to the time when the temperance movement was around, everyone now has access to endless mountains of information, and people can actually verify and call people out on their nonsense. And I think what we've seen with the anti-vaping crowd is that very often they take intellectual shortcuts to make their arguments. And so what people can expect from the episodes is not just have an introduction to it, which, maybe from some of your listeners, there's a lot of information that might not necessarily be new, but also taking a closer look at sort of the way the argument is constructed from the other side, and why it's important to talk about it. So I think this is really what I wanted to do with the series, what people can expect from it. So it's not just something that is entertaining for you to watch if you already care about the issue, but it's also something that hopefully will make you excited to share it with other people.
Yeah, and one of my favorite parts of the first episode was actually that this Fun Police is not only public health experts. That includes nowadays a lot of different parts of society, and one prominent part play moms in all those topics. What's up with the moms?
Yeah, I mean, so most organizations that start with moms against and whether it's gambling, vaping, and so on, are now called parents against. But I mean, it's essentially the same thing, in the sense that, you know, it's mostly mothers that are very concerned about the vaping consumption, in this case, moms against vaping or parents against vaping, the vaping consumption of minors, and that's why they argue for widespread regulation. And I mean, this is also something that I say in the episode. I mean, our duty, parental collective obligation is to protect minors from having access to those products, and to be very strict on minors not having access to those products. I very much favor retailers who disregard the laws on you know, IDing people for that those should be harshly punished. I don't think they should be going to jail for that, but we should really question whether they are really actors who should have access to age-restricted products, right? That's a conversation we should have. And what they do is they say, well, ultimately, these companies are just trying to target children, therefore there's no justification for them. And so they entirely disregard the fact that, you know, adult smokers are quitting through e-cigarettes, through heat-not-burn devices, all the different nicotine alternatives. And so, unfortunately, I mean, it's really hard to argue on sort of on the morality of it when you have a parent group that says, you know, our children are adversely affected, because that's always, you know, then you really just arguing on the sort of the sensationalist headlines that, you know, sometimes you see out there, and that's why I really wanted to talk about them too. Because they're quite prolific, and just from the virtue of the way they're called, moms against vaping, that is just, you know, it's eye-catching. You know, who would not be interested in that story? But it turns out it's not scientists against vaping; it's moms against vaping, and you can see that from the arguments they're making.
And you brought us a very nice example of kind of a summary of my personal heroes about this issue, that kids are brought into the debate for all different kind of reasons, and it's not always about protecting them, or it's always stated to protect them, but there are different goals behind that sometimes as well. And I think Ethan Nadelman summarized that very neatly and very outspoken as well in the following clip.
Remember, nicotine doesn't cause cancer. What kills people is the burnt particle matter, the combustible stuff. That's why the Public Health Service in Britain and the Royal College of Physicians has estimated that e-cigarettes are 90 to 95% less dangerous to human health than are cigarettes, right? But you still get that sort of stupid, uneducated, you're just substituting one addiction for another. Right now, and then you also, of course, go the kids. You know, why couldn't we legalize medical marijuana? Oh, you got to protect the kids. Why can't we have needle exchange programs? Got to protect the kids. Why can't we reduce these harsh mandatory sentences? Got to protect the kids. I mean, there's like always holding up, you know, as if the whole drug war being justified as one great big Child Protection Act. And that's exactly what's happening with the tobacco issue now. Why can't we do everything possible to get out there alternative forms of nicotine and tobacco, including flavored products? Got to protect the kids.
Yes, what I really liked about this rant is that, you know, Ethan Nadelman has this natural ability to talk himself up, even without being necessarily prompted. I really enjoy this. And he echoes the frustration that a lot of people have on this issue, because, I mean, he was working for so long in sensible drug reform, and he was confronted to precisely the same arguments. And we in the series also talk about rules on alcohol, rules on gambling, and sort of the think of the children type argument, a bit like from the Simpsons clip, keeps coming back. And it's unfortunate, because no matter how often you tell people this is for adult consumers, you always end up back at square one, where it's just about the children again. I mean, look, if we made every rule in mind with children can potentially access this, there would be no R-rated movies out there. There would be no access to bungee jumping, because somebody might lie about their age and do it even though they're underage. So I have this frustration, and also similar to what Ethan Nadelman is expressing, and also eventually you have this tendency of disregarding it. It's like, well, you know, this children conversation doesn't really matter. that's why I always say, like, I think when we have the conversation, it's always good to bring up, as if we robotically keep repeating it, no, children, people underage should not have access to these products. Can we now have a conversation about the actual benefits of the products? So yeah, I think if it's a disclaimer, we have to keep bringing up, and we'll have to keep bringing it up. It's unfortunate, and Ethan, I think, expressed it best in his clip.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, and it's very frustrating for us as well, because every time we talk about vaping, this is always the issue which is brought up. And I think it's a very important issue, and we need to really think of how to protect kids of accessing those kind of products. But I don't believe some of these anti-vaping groups or neo-prohibitionists nowadays that they are actually care about the kids, because they don't really listen to them. If you look at all the surveys, it's always kind of problems at their personal life. So that if they would really want to help them, then they will campaign for better schools, better mental health care, better housing, those kind of things, because that would really help those young kids to stay away from dangerous activities or drugs or substances and those kind of things. And they never bring that up. It's always vaping flavors, because I think most of them, they want to ban the product without saying they want to ban it. So that's always an easy example, and I think that even is a disadvantage to the cause of supporting and helping kids.
Yeah, this entire flavor conversation, I think, is so asinine, as if children are only tuned into things because of the flavor of something. I mean,
like we were tuned in the smoking flavors, right?
Yeah, I mean, my first cigarette was a Marlboro Red, and I mean, everyone who tells me that the first cigarette tastes good is lying. There's no way that tastes good. And so, I mean, also children, like, what is the problem with both toddlers and very young children, is that they pick something off the ground and try to eat it. I don't think the dirt is strawberry flavored, and that's why they're picking it up. They're doing it because they're being subversive. They look at, sometimes, you see this, like, children pick something up off the floor and they look at their parents as they put it in their mouth, even the way they were told not to do it, right? And so I think it's trying to be subversive. It's trying to show to friends, hey, this is cool, this is fun. It has nothing to do with the flavors. And to try and narrow it down to that is very silly. And also, I mean, it's not like they're going to be flavorless. And this whole idea that we're going to get rid of all the flavors and now tobacco flavor is going to be the only one left, which is like just insane to me, how we got to this point where the one thing that people are trying to quit is supposed to be the only flavor left for them. At least some jurisdictions are talking about it that way. Yeah, I think the flavor debate is, I mean, that's one of those things. I mean, vaping is something you can learn about and read about and understand the effects of it. But I mean, the flavor conversation, you only need to think about it for 5 minutes and realize that most of the arguments just don't make sense.
Yeah, but that's also the reason why almost none of those groups bring up the actual health effects anymore, because there is no debate about that it's less harmful. So they need to find a new argument. And the kids one is always the most appealing and the easiest one to make. But looking to the time, I would like to discuss two things about the next episode coming out this week, which is focused on vaping. And I already had the pleasure to listen to it. And I for me personally, there are two things in there. One is not a real debate, but a debate about Andrew Huberman, and you have a clip from him in there with John Dicey. Maybe you can give the listeners a little overview of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the listeners are pretty familiar with Andrew Huberman, not just because of what he says on nicotine, but I mean, a lot of, the life advice. And I mean, he's really someone who's has high expectations of his audience, right? I mean, it's like his podcast really goes into the detail of it, and a lot of terms that, you're supposed to know, apparently. And he is controversial in the anti-smoking realm, because he says that there are also benefits to nicotine when it comes to concentration, focus, that sort of thing. I think it's opportune to debate to what extent that is a positive effect that warrants people's continued consumption. I think that's not necessarily a good reason to continue using nicotine, and to what extent it is also relevant in order to make you better at your task and so on. I think that's a scientific debate we can have. But the clip that I play in the series is from This American Life, where they interviewed John Dicey, and John Dicey is sort of the successor to Alan Carr, and some people will know Alan Carr from his book The Easy Way to Quit Smoking, which essentially purports as a book that if you read this book after this, you know exactly how to quit smoking. And fair enough. I mean, it's a best-selling book, and a lot of people quit smoking cold turkey because of this book. And all power to you if that worked for you. But this idea that this is the only thing that will work out, I mean, they've created a bit of a cultish surrounding around this book because so many people have actually quit smoking because of it that they think now it must be the only solution to it. And John Dicey goes on This American Life and talks about it, and then he's confronted with the arguments of Andrew Huberman, and he goes, well, that's ridiculous. Nicotine has no benefits. And then the moderator goes, well, I mean, I talked to Andrew Huberman, and it sounds pretty backed up by science that there's benefits to nicotine. And John Dicey got very defensive about it, and he ultimately concluded that he's not interested in reading about the science. He first says he would recognize if there were facts on this issue, and then concludes that he's not interested in learning about the science. So I thought that was very telling.
That was so baffling to me, this utter uninterest in science and refuting it. I even wrote down, let me get it up, the exact quote he said. So he was saying, I'm struggling to understand why there is a desperation to prove that nicotine does something when it doesn't. I haven't ever heard such nonsense. And then he said about Huberman, he has a theory and he's just wrong. So basically just outright saying I deny all science, which has a different outcome than I wanted to have. And then also this disrespect of all nicotine consumers who actually find some kind of benefit using it. Otherwise they wouldn't do it. It's not like we are all some addicted robots and can't control ourselves anymore. For most people, it has some positive effect as well. And just denying science, and then a scientist like you, man, that was so baffling to me. I couldn't believe what I'm listening to.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was very telling because, I mean, the entire foundation that was created after Alan Carr's death was about helping people quit smoking and being understanding of people who want to quit smoking and how difficult it can be. And that's also how this episode on This American Life started out. And then the moment he's confronted with a counter argument on sort of the effects of nicotine, he gets not just irritated, he gets awfully upset in that conversation. So that's why I really wanted to include. It's one of the longer clips that I play in the series, but I thought it was very relevant for people to sort of see how that interaction can go and how very quickly it can move away from empathy with smokers to blatantly saying, I'm just not interested in the science.
Indeed. I'm not sure if I should ask these questions because I don't want to get you in a position where I need to give away the whole conclusion of the Fun Police and the series. But what do you think? Where does this new prohibition trend come from, and why do we see it basically everywhere around the world?
I mean, it really is not an old idea. This is also something we talk about in episode 1. It's not geographically restricted or sometimes even ideologically believe that to believe that there's good reason for prohibition. I had conversations with people who asked me, well, I mean, cigarettes are clearly bad. Why don't we just ban all of them? Right. And so there's this idea that, we just make it illegal, therefore it goes away. I mean, if that was true, right, then the drug war would have been a roaring success and nobody would have ever touched cannabis. I mean, if you look at just like sort of the evolution of sort of the cannabis example, like how harshly this drug was criminalized and the consumption and the possession was criminalized and how ineffective the rules were. So I think prohibition has a tendency of having a cyclical comeback. And now we're experiencing one of those cycles, and it is very narrowed in on vaping specifically because it's a new technology, and there's always going to be people who don't like it, and they resort to prohibitionism as an idea to get rid of it. And how we overcome this has a lot to do with the public reaction to it. And that's why I also say it shouldn't only be about the consumers to defend their consumption, because that alone will not be enough. There aren't enough people vaping out there for politicians to consider it to be a problem on, those people are not gonna vote for me. And it might make a difference in some constituencies and so on, but ultimately people who vape are still in the minority in the overall population. So I think we need to look at this as a whole. So to not just be, well, I'm a vaping consumer, so I don't care about prohibition if it affects gambling because I never gamble. I think there's sort of the recognition that prohibition doesn't work across the board, and communicating on this, like, this may not be something that I'm interested in doing, but I think prohibition has negative consequences, not just for the consumers, but also for me, because what we do is we boost illicit crime and then all these gangs benefit from it. I think that's sort of what we need to do about this issue when prohibitionists come along. So all the reasons why prohibition is back in the news, I can't give you all of them, but I think it's sort of this instinctive reaction. It's like, I don't like it, let's ban it. And I think the pushback needs to be, well, it's not just about your feelings, it's about, well, what are the facts here on the effects of prohibition, and how can we actually have a system that is productive for the users and also allows for the individuality of doing what makes you feel good.
Yeah, and I think we also learned that not much is safe from the prohibitionists. So basically every consumer will use, eat, drink something which might be on the agenda in the future if there is absolutely no pushback. Even in the harm reduction world, we see it now that we as a vaping organization defend heavily nicotine pouches as well, because as you say, vaping might not work for everyone. Maybe for someone pouches work, and we are very happy to defend those as well, because they are also on the agenda from those prohibitionists. Maybe to wrap it up, Bill, tell us again, where do we find Fun Police, and where should we go if we need more information about this topic?
Well, I'm sure that you're going to put some links in the description, but in any case, Fun Police on wherever you listen to podcasts, you just type that in, and then you can subscribe to the podcast. It's a Consumer Choice Center original podcast, and also tick the notification bell. So if you're subscribing to it right now and you don't want to miss the next upcoming episodes, 4 and 5, and also 3, dropping on Wednesday, then you get a notification from your podcast player that it's out. So yeah, please subscribe. You can listen to all of that. Also, for the people who like to have it on their laptop and play it on YouTube, you can do that as well. It's also available on YouTube if you just type in Fun Police and Consumer Choice Center. So yeah, please subscribe, recommend it to a friend, and rate it 5 stars if you like it.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming on, Bill, and talking about this important issue. Very interesting for us as well. And I was part of episode 3 as well. So thank you for having me the other way around. So take care and see you again soon.
Thanks for having me.